Now let's see if this works. Yes. All right. So I think it's on. Yes. So hello everyone. My name is Nima Kaksar. I am one of the TAs of this course, and today I'll have a crash course for you about what Python is, how it works. I will also teach you the essentials, which you need to know, and I'll also give some demonstrations, basic demonstrations of Python coding. So let's start with the question: what is Python? Well, Python is a program language that is used widely in many applications. It is definitely used in engineering. It is used in science in general. It can also be used in statistics and so on. It is an object-oriented program language, just as Java. And an object-oriented program language is usually circulated around these concepts here below. So these concepts which I have, which stands here, are those which form what an object-oriented program language is. So we have objects that can be, for instance, variables or lists. We have classes, which is a collection of objects, or in this case, collection of lists, for instance. We have inheritance. It means that it can inherit properties from different classes, such as a variable passing from one class to another class, or variable passing from one function to another function. And we also have encapsulation and polymorphism. Now, if you compare Python to the other programming languages, such as Java, it more or less has the same basics. The only difference is the syntax. So we have control statements, loops in this case. In Python, we have while and for loops. We also have conditional statements, if, elif, and else. And elif is basically else if. We also declare variables as other programming languages. And there are several different types of variables, such as integers, strings, floats, booleans, and so on. And we can create functions, and we can pass variables between several functions as well. And that is thanks to the inheritance property. Now, so before we start to code with Python, we need to familiarize ourselves with the Python environment. Now, there are different coding programs to use if you want to program with Python. And the most common ones are Visual Studio Code, or VSC, and Python Idle. And the advantages with Visual Studio Code are that all the programming languages are in one program. So you have Java, you have Python, you have C++, you have all the web languages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and so on. Everything is in one program. And it means that there's no reason to download separate programs for different program languages. However, you need to download separate packages for a specific program language. If you want to program with Python, well, then you need to download the essential packages for Python. If you want to program with Java, then you need to download the specific packages for Java, and so on. And it is very easy to use, and it can be connected to GitHub for larger projects. You can also clone repositories, which means that the code that someone else has written, if you are in a team, of course, you can easily use that in your computer. You can literally monitor everything and fill in the blanks, as I would say. But the best feature with Visual Studio Code is that it is free, literally, which means that no subscription is needed. The advantages with Python Idle are that it is a very simple program which only focuses on Python. So if you're confused of which packages you want to download for Python or and so on, Visual Studio Code is very good. It contains all of the necessary packages, and it's also beginner friendly. So if you're not familiar with what Visual Studio Code is, or if you think that Visual Studio Code is too advanced, then use Python Idle if you prefer that, if you prefer so. Yes, and let's dive into the interesting part. But before I will start to define what a code is and the anatomy behind Python, I will describe first what a pseudocode is. Now, I will describe a pseudocode as a short and overall description of the code and its contents. It describes the algorithm behind the given code, and usually pseudocodes are written as comments next to each line, or a small / general paragraph, or a description at the beginning of the code. In this example, I have written this code. It is a number comparison code, where I have said in the first method here that a program which compares two integers given by the user by using control statements, if, elif, and else, displays the result in the terminal. Now, this is a general description of what a code does. It says what has been used, for instance, control statements, and it also says that what the code does compares to integers given by the user, and where the results should be printed, which is in the terminal. In this example, I have created two variables, A and B, and they take an input from the user. The input should be an integer in both cases, give a number and give a second number. And I have written here that it takes two input values from the user, and the input values are integers. And if we move along to the next part, it says that comparison of its input values for three conditions and displays the correct outputs. So in the first condition, I said that if both A or B are less than 0, then this message should be printed in the terminal. If A is greater than B, then this message should be printed in the terminal. And if these conditions are false, then this message should be printed in the terminal. And if you ask me, I would say that if you combine these two, that you have a small paragraph or you have a small general description at the beginning of your code in combination with inline comments, which I've done here, I would say it's good. It looks very neat and it's what you have used. So let's talk about creating variables or declaring variables. Now, in Python and in many other programming languages, we have different types of variables. We have strings. That is, for instance, a sentence. It can be a word or it can be a paragraph. And the abbreviation is str, which stands for strings. We have integers, such as 0, 1, 2, 10, 100, and the abbreviation is int. Then we have floating numbers or decimal numbers, such as 125.00 or 3.1415. These two are floating numbers, and the abbreviation is float. And then you have Boolean values, true and false, where true has the value of 1 and false has the value of 0. And the abbreviation is bool. If you look at this code here, which is basically the same code as the previous slides, I have created two variables, A and B. These take an integer from the user, both of them actually, and based on the input values, the code performs the following steps below. The same thing goes for C and D here as well, but in this case, I have asked the user to write a string instead. So what is your name and surname? Well, you need to give your name, which is a string, of course. And same thing goes for the where do you live? If you write a number, for instance, like 2, then it most likely would give you an error message. You can also create and declare variables in such a way that you assign a specific variable with a specific value. For instance, A1 is assigned 6 and A2 is assigned to 10. And here I have created a new variable called S, and the variable should hold the sum of A1 and A2. So 6 plus 10 is 16, which means that if I run this code, I would expect that this line, sum of the numbers, should print 16 in the terminal. Now you might ask yourself, why is there a plus sign here and why is there a comma sign here? And the answer is that when you use strings, you use something called concatenation, which means that you merge 2 strings, and then it displays and it prints 1 string, literally. That is only used for strings. While for integers, you usually use a comma here, or floating numbers. If I, for instance, a plus sign here, if I use a comma here for a string, it would most likely give me an error message. A syntax error, most likely. Now let's talk about how we define and create functions. So a question is, what is a function? Well, I would describe a function as a machine which converts input values to output values with the help of a mathematical expression, which is usually declared. And it's easy to modify the input parameters without altering the variables inside the code. And you can also pass variables between many functions without declaring the same variable repeatedly. So if you only declare it once, then you can use it once. You don't have to declare the same variable 10 times or 20 times. Only once, and that's it. And many functions can also be used simultaneously as well. So you don't need to create 5 different Python documents where you store one function. You can have everything in one script. Now in this case, So in this case, I have 2 different functions which I've declared. And when you declare 2 functions, you need to have the header def ahead of the function. So in this case, def, then you have the name of the function, which is running. And in this case, you have 3 input parameters, A, B, and C. Now, if I go at the end of the code, I have called the function running, but here instead of A, B, and C, I have assigned values to A, B, and C. So in this case, A is equal to 0, 4 is equal to B, and -3 is equal to C. Now, what it does is that when I run this code, new A should have the value of A, which is 0 plus D, and D is 1000, so 0 plus 1000 is 1000. And the same thing goes for new B and new C. And based on the conditions which I declared here below, I would expect the right output to be printed when it's all finished. In this case, though, if you look at the second code, I have also defined and created a function called running. In this case, I don't have any input parameters. What I have done is called variable passing. So I have created 3 variables, new A, new B, new C, and I have also created a new function here called difference. And difference is also mentioned here. And basically what it does is that the variables which I have created up here, they are reused in the new function called difference. And D1, D2, D3 will of course have different values based on what values new A, new B, and new C have, and I would expect a value for the variable called diff, and so on. Now we also have control statements in Python, and the most common control statements are loops. In Python we use for loops and while loops, and they are mainly used for iteration, which is basically repetition of a code execution, and they have a stop and start value. We also have statements, if, elif, and else. Elif is else if statements, and they're mainly used for instance, comparison or to give general conditions to a code. And it has a pyramid structure. So if the first condition is false, then it jumps to the second condition, and if the second condition is false, then it goes to the third condition, and so on, until the condition which is true is actually used, and the variable is either printed or reused in the next instruction. And an advice is that keywords in these exercises might give you a hint of what kind of control statement you should use. And as you can see, this is just some brief keywords. For instance, if it says repeat or iterate or make X calculations, well, then you for sure need to use a loop, whether it's a for loop or while loop. There can also be, in the instruction, can also be said that until a value has been reached, a specific value has been reached, then most likely it's a while loop which needs to be used. And well, if condition A is not fulfilled, then it's an if statement. If condition B is not fulfilled, it's an else, elif statement. However, if you have two conditions, you only have if and else statements, no elif. Elif is only used if you have minimum of three conditions. And yes, otherwise is usually an else statement. And as you can see here, I have this is a code of some control statements which have been used. In this case, it's loops. So I have defined a function, I have created a function, and I have a for loop here. And range is usually used when you declare for loop, because you want to have a start value and then you want to have an end value, and you want to be within those two intervals. So for instance, I have created for I in range I, comma n, start value, end value, and 1 is the number of steps between each iteration. And then I expect I to be printed, and I is basically the index for each step. So if I assign I to be 1 and n to be 10, then I expect the output to be all the numbers between 1 and 9, with one step in between. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the same thing is for this second function which I've declared. For this case, we have a while loop. So a for loop is a semi-open interval, while a while loop is a closed interval. And I will describe it as follows. Let's see here. So for loop, I have said that let's say that you want to print the numbers between 1 and 10, and then you want to have one step in between. What it does is that it prints all the numbers 1, 2, 3, observe that the start value is printed, but the end value, which was expected to be 10, is not printed. So we can define this as the following mathematical expression: 1, 10. Semi-opened interval. And this is a bracket. It's not a square bracket, it's a normal bracket. While if you use a while loop, while, and we want to use it for the same condition, then it prints all the way from 1 to 10. 1, 2. And this is called a closed interval. So 1. Or if you want to use a for loop to display all the numbers between 1 and 10, then in your range, should be between 1 to 11. So range 1, 11. And value, and this is your start value. Now I will go through some basic coding and exercises which I have written myself. And this is just a practice to give you some hands-on programming. And I will also go through the solutions. So the first question or first exercise says, write a small program which takes your name as an input and return a greeting, for instance, hello and your name. If I go to open my Python, sure. Can also share my one as well. Okay. So it says that write a small program which takes your name as an input and return a greeting, for instance, hello, your name. So first thing I do is that I define a variable called a, and I assign it to, let's see here, why doesn't this work? Oops. It's a string type and input, and quotation marks. What is name? And then we want to use the whatever we assign a to print out a greeting statement. So print greetings oh, wait a minute. Should plus sign here, my laptop's in English. Oh no. Let's see here. I need to sign my main screen. Go through Swedish to English. Yes. Share new screen. Share. Yes. Plus a. And if I run this code right now, which I I run this code right now, run module, then you can see here in the terminal says, what is your name? So I type my name as Nima, and then greetings Nima will be the output, which was exactly what we asked for. Hello, your name. But this case, I've written greetings instead. I can of course change this to hello instead. Hello. Hello. What is your name? Nima. And voila, hello Nima is the output. All right, so let's clear this up, and I'll use. Okay. So the second exercise says write a function which takes two integers between 1 and 10 and compare their sum with an already defined variable d is equal to 10. Let's stop there. So what do we know? We know that we have a variable called d and it's assigned to 10. We need to create a function, and the function should take two integers between 1 and 10. So we define the function first, define function. And we assign these to a and b, which are integers. And there's a comma here. And we have a variable called d, and we assign it to 10. Now, what does it say? What does it next say? If one of the integers is negative, print an error message to the user. Okay. It means if a or b are both less than 0, then we need to print an error message. So if a is less than 0 or b is less than 0, print error. Now, in this case, we can actually use another way. We can use a break statement here. So what it does is that if, for instance, a or b is equal to 0, then the program will stop. The rest of the instructions will not be followed. So I can write as a comment here, break can also. We'll test that once this is done, so I can show you how exactly it means. Right. Next step. If the sum exceeds 10, print the following message: the sum of the integers is greater than 10. Otherwise, print the following message: the sum is less than 10. Okay. So we have three conditions right now. So I will use an elif statement. Elif a plus b exceeds 10, which means is greater than 10, or is greater than d in this case, because we have assigned d to be 10. Then print the sum exceeds 10, or something like that. The sum of the integers, the sum of the integers exceeds 10. The sum of And if this statement is not, and if this condition is false, we use an else condition, and it should print the sum. I can basically copy what I have. The sum of the integers is less than 10. Okay, we're almost done. I will call this function, and I will assign a to be, for instance, 2, and b to be 9. So let's test and see what the expected output should be. A is 2, b is 9. So if you look at the first condition, if a is less than 0 or b is less than 0, 2 is not less than 0 and b is greater than 0. So this is false. This condition is false. Jump to the next one. If a plus b is greater than 10, so 2 plus 9 is 11, and 11 is greater than d, and d was assigned to 10, which is true, then I would expect this message to be printed in the terminal. The sum of the integers is greater than 10. Now let's see how it works. And as you can see here, the sum of the integers is greater than 10, which was exactly what we anticipated to be our output. Okay, I can of course change this these values, or these values of the parameters. Let's say I put a to be -1 instead. If I run this, or let's see here, a is less than 0, or b is less than 0. So a is definitely less than 0 because we have -1, which means that I should expect an error message. So run error, which is exactly what we said. And this goes on and on if you alter the values of both a or b. Okay, great, this is done. So let's go to the third question. Display all of the numbers between 1 and 20 in a list using a for loop. Okay. So if I bring this one up again, as well. Sure. Yes, this one up as well. This one. Okay, I will do it this way. So display all the numbers between 1 and 20 in a list using a for loop, right? So I will use a for loop here, which just delete everything. So there are different ways you can actually there are different procedures to tackle this question, but I will show you a general solution, or at least how I solved it. So let's see here. Yes. So here I will create a function called loop1, def loop1, and I also assign it to be the input parameters to be a and b. And here I say for I in range 1 to 20, print I, and loop on or let's do this a and b, sorry, a and b. So go here and I'll assign a to be 1 and b to be 20. However, if I run this program right now, all the numbers between 1 and 19 will be printed. So I'll change this one to 21 and I'll run the code. I hope you can see my screen. Yes, you can. Run module. And as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up until 20 is printed. Okay, so this is good. Now we also have a condition here. Once the iteration is done, ask the user for one start and end value and repeat the same procedure with the new values. Okay. So if I go back to my code, I will go back as well. Now, so what we can do here, we can also, of course, solve this in multiple ways, but I have I want to define a new function here. So def loop 2, and we have a1, b1 as our input parameters. And I can basically copy everything which I've written here. And here I want to say that I will make all of these. Sorry. If a1 is greater than b1, break. Because assume that the start value is greater than the end value, then it will not increase from the lowest to the highest. We don't want to have that. We want to have from lowest to highest, which means that A should be less than B. That is our ideal case. Else, print I, yes, which I print I. Okay. And I want to assign A1 and B1 with user input. So A1 integer input, give a start value. I will copy this one. Give an end value, and b1. And I'll call this function, so loop 1. So loop 2, I mean. Loop 2, a1, b1. Now if I run this one, I should expect. Okay, so this is printed from the previous exercise, which I have here. I can delete it, so much easier. So give a start value, I say 1. Give an end value, I said 20 or 21. And all the numbers between 1 and 20 is printed. I can do the same thing, but in this case, I would say that a1 is -1 and the end value should be -10, and nothing happens. And why doesn't anything happen? That is thanks to the break statement here. It cuts the loop and terminates it. So the rest will not be printed, or the rest will not be executed. All right. So that's it for this statement. For this question, I will go through the next one. Now, it says, repeat the exercise above, but this time a while loop should be used for 5 iterations between 1 and 5, and no user input is needed. Okay. So I will bring this up. And I will keep this one. This one should be. So while while I, for instance, or a1 maybe, while a1 is less or equal to b1, then I also want to have the same if condition. So if a1 is greater than b1, I want to have this break statement, break, else print a1, and a1 is equal to a1 plus 1. Now, this means that it increments, it goes to the next value. So if I assign A1 to be 1 and B1 to be, let's say, 1 to 5, run this now. Run. As you can see here in the terminal, all of the values between 1 and 5 are printed, including the first and the final value. So we don't need to add, so we don't need to have 6 instead of 5. If we want to print all the numbers between 1 and 5, then a while loop will solve that. We can also see that the number of iteration will be 4 because we have 1 iteration between 1 and 2, 1 iteration between 2 and 3, 1 iteration between 3 and 4, and so on. And of course, you can alter the values for A1 and B1 as well, as you can see here. All right, so that's about it. Thank you for listening to this crash course. I hope that it was useful and it helped you a bit. And if you have any questions, please send us an email and we will answer you as fast as possible. Thank you and good luck.